military has begun strikes against Al-Qaeda terrorist training camps and military installations of the Taliban regime.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, my dear brothers and sisters. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, inshallah you are all well. Today we're going to talk about the Taliban and the momentous 29th of February 2020 conditional peace agreement signed by the US in Qatar. It has happened after 20 long years, and its longest war, America has finally come to its bleeding senses. It has rather sensibly realized that no, it just ain't gonna happen. This stubborn Kurta Punjabi wearing ragtag militia, an army of ill-equipped, barely trained yet savvy and battle-hardened Soviet-era Mujahideen veterans, farmers, poppy smugglers and cave dwellers simply ain't going anywhere. Which is quite remarkable, really, because the mission was always going to fail. The American mission, that is. History aside, I mean, Alexander tried and failed. The British Empire tried and failed. The Soviets tried and failed. So even if we accept that, okay, fine, the Americans are clueless bozos when it comes to world history and other cultures apart from their own, and generally drawing lessons from the past, they should have known at least that the Taliban and the Pashtun people are essentially one and the same thing. And they didn't. Now, I know the Taliban is a madrasa/student quasi-religion, religio-political organization, but it's so fundamentally embedded in the Pashtun nation in terms of its strength, it draws personnel and culture, that it's almost the one and the same thing. If I was to give you an analogy to make my point, well, it would be like the American troops coming over to the United Kingdom with the stated goal of killing all the conservatives. Well, good luck with that mission. Because it won't be just the 30,000 Tory party members you'd have to get rid of. There will be millions of conservatives with a small c embedded in the overall UK population who will sympathise with the Tory principles of, say, law and order, low taxation, etc. My point is, the Americans were always on a hiding to nothing. So what a royal cock-up. So the agreement effectively calls for the withdrawal of US troops, all that within 14 months, provided the Taliban uphold their side of the bargain too. Okay, that seems fair. Good luck with that. Frankly, the whole thing has been a grade A disaster of historic proportions for the Americans, despite having the world's biggest defense budget of a staggering, get this, 800 billion eye-watering dollars. Remember, America's defense spending is equal to the next 10 biggest spenders combined. Wow, that is truly astounding. And I don't care how you varnish this disaster, whether you call it a strategic withdrawal, a change of, tactics and strategy at the top, well, that's just simply not going to wash it with me. Because, number one, the Taliban, now this is important, the Taliban are still running around in the rugged terrain of Afghanistan. Number two, the Taliban still control X amount of the Afghan landmass. Number three, the fact that the Taliban are on the power-sharing table, calling the shots. All that is evidence, as far as I'm concerned, that the Americans have epically failed. Oh yes. My point is, you don't talk peace. Do you talk peace and negotiate with an enemy you've defeated? I don't think so. So that basically says it all. Now, perhaps the strongest and the most obvious evidence, though, that the Taliban have won is that even after 20 long years of America trying to bomb them into oblivion, the Taliban are still killing people with a sort of mindless abandon. Sadly, just this September 2020, the Taliban launched a wave of attacks on security checkpoints in southern Afghanistan, killing a total of 28 Afghan policemen. That's not to say they didn't kill other people during that month. Just take a look at this picture. All this is happening almost a generation later. So they are still going. It's mind-boggling that the Americans haven't, despite all their latest military gadget and tech, $800 billion budget, as I say, military budget, as I said, they still haven't dealt with them. It's mind-boggling. It truly is. What I want you to do now is just look at this extraordinary picture over here, because it's one of those pictures. It's one of those pictures that your grandchildren, and in turn their grandchildren, will be poring over in utter wonder and amazement in the upcoming generations. This picture is going straight into school textbooks, my friends, and it will almost certainly be starring in those cheesy viral video lists called Pictures You Must See Before You Die. How cringe. So, guys, what exactly do you see? Now, you might assume that the fat one is the U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and you'd be correct. Apparently, he's standing next to his favorite cab driver from Manhattan, New York. Well, I refer to the gentleman's nondescript demeanor and traditional non-flashy clothing. He just looks like everybody else. You would see 100 of these people looking like that in, say, New York or London or in your local mosque. There's nothing to say that this guy is somebody important, but actually, get this, actually, that is the 52-year-old Mullah Abdul Ghani Baradar, the equivalent of, say, Mike Pompeo, the Secretary of State of America, for the Taliban. So he is of equal importance and stature. Anyway, so now there's a reason why this guy is in this picture and doing the whole sort of diplomacy with the Secretary of State of the United States of America, because he is a former deputy to the late Taliban founder, Mullah Omar, who died in 2013, and a co-founder of the Taliban organization. So, even here, he didn't think it fit to wear anything like a suit or anything more flashy when he's coming to meet the Secretary of State of the most powerful superpower in the history of the world. But it seems that is just how they roll, y'all. No flashy suits, no pretensions of grandeur, Rolex watches, expensive perfume, and grooming. No, none of that. They just prefer to let their action do their talking. Now, this pic, this one, was taken in February 2020 when this Baradar was signing the said agreement on the withdrawal of the US forces. No, look, I don't care. I honestly don't. For those who say, oh, America could have wiped out the Taliban inside a week if only they didn't have to spare civilian casualties, something Trump has floated in the past, well, I call immediate BS on that. Baseless theory. Do you really think that they didn't try the all-out, quote, flatten everything in sight strategy? I mean, it is a gross underestimate, but 43,000 civilians don't just die over one or two military cock-ups. Come on, give me a break. That many people aren't just killed by accident. Pursuing the Taliban at the expense of killing civilians was evidently a thought-out military tactic. It's got to be. That's how the military think. That's how the military think. They're not looking out for the health and safety of the people they're conquering. So somewhere that decision was taken. Maybe the Pentagon or the White House, who knows? It will probably never come out. This is what Western right-wingers say when they want to minimize the breadth and the depth of the American humbling. I mean, there's nothing particularly unique about that. I'm sure the Soviet sympathizers said something similar when they were in the same position in the 80s. But if you're going to say that, then you must also say that the authoritarian Soviet forces, they also had their hands tied, because they also went in the same way. Now, the Stalinists, this becomes absurd because the Stalinists wouldn't even spare their own people. So can you really say and imagine that they would go easy on the Mujahideen, their enemy at the time? I don't think so. Now, just think for a second what's going on here. Now, I don't mind telling you that I find encounters like this so fascinating. Don't you? Apparently, these two are meant to be sworn and bitter enemies, finally coming face to face, ready to rip each other's heads off. Okay, maybe. Or what I think is, yeah, maybe 300 or 400 years ago, I might have believed that to be the case, because then war was actually personal. The leaders got their hands dirty and put their necks on the line. They were on the front line. Modern warfare is just so different. It's impersonal, mechanical, and less emotion-driven. Killing and then making up with the enemy is nowadays more like a business deal. I bet you my mortgage that if these two were left in a room to talk, by the end of the night, not only would Pompeo look more fatter, but they'd realize that they probably had more in common than not and would probably become pretty close buddies, if not best buddies. They'd certainly have more in common. You can just imagine their conversation, talking about geopolitics, war, and all that sort of stuff. I think, despite their cultural and political differences, I think that all that sort of stuff is overblown in my opinion. I mean, ideologies only look stark and significant on paper. A lot of people, I think, find a lot of commonality with each other when they start to sit down and talk. So, what is going through their minds? What the hell is going through their minds there? I wish I could have a peep into their minds. Well, I certainly know what's going on in the mind of Mike Pompeo. What makes it all the more fascinating is that these two represent the two opposite poles of the civilizational spectrum, and you know what I mean. Now, compared to modern, advanced, first world superpower America, the Central and South Asian Afghan civilization is a completely different world. People here are still donning elaborate cloth-based turbans and kurta like they did in the medieval period. And perhaps even beyond, people are still recognized by tribal associations and lineages like it has been the case for thousands of years. Now, these fiercely independent Pashtuns live by a code of life called the Pashtun Wali, which is literally translated as the way of the Pashtuns. I'm not joking. It sounds remarkably like the way of the warrior, doesn't it? And it pretty much is something of that order if you looked it up. I urge you to look it up because it's very interesting. Honor, bravery, loyalty, hospitality to guests and vanquished enemies, and respect in custom your tribal elders and kin is a fundamental part of their ancient culture that has been passed down from generation to generation. As you can therefore imagine, history and religion is of the utmost importance in that culture. They will not compromise on any of that. And you can pretty much see that in evidence through this picture. I mean, that guy is not going to dress up for anybody. He's not going to put on a tie and a suit for anybody. He's not going to turn his back on his culture. So these two respective nations, peoples, and cultures could not be more different. But gosh, just look at what they're wearing. It speaks volumes, doesn't it? That suit Pompeo is wearing, that is probably worth around about $1,000 US. and I'm seriously trying to be conservative here, I reckon it could actually even be more, perhaps even double that figure. But I don't know for sure. And I'm taking a reasonable guess, seeing who Pompeo is, being who and what he is, indeed no less than the Secretary of State of the United States. Look, if someone like me, your average Mo, is spending about $500 on a suit, okay, well, back in the day when I was more reckless with my money, far younger, then he's easily spending $1,000 at least, if not double that much or triple that much. Americans, and to be fair, all Western nations, they just love their smart, professional, executive class look, don't they? The suit tone is typically subdued, black, could be navy, but I think it's black. Like the grave and historic situation demands, I guess. It is also a cultural piece, a cold, subtle signifier, oh yes, and symbol of the ethno-national identity of the United States, its location being the cold, harsh waters and climate of the blue Atlantic Ocean that abuts the United States and Europe. It symbolizes the cross-cultural and historical influence America draws on and is most proud of, Europe, and the Puritan virtues and values of somber simplicity of the United Kingdom in particular. If I was to guess, the Mullah's attire won't be anywhere near as expensive. It will probably be $100 at most, I'd guess. It is far less a decadent society, a largely agricultural economy, still less given to creature comforts and consumer goods, like it is the case in the West. And this is reflected in this timeless piece that is being worn by Mr. Baradar. Now, unlike the suit, this sort of outfit has been a part of the African culture for easily 500 years plus, I'd guess. In fact, this turban is considered a symbol of a Pashtun's chivalry. It all reflects the Taliban's reverence for the past and tradition. They value, and they don't just pay lip service to it, they value serious orthodoxy and tradition over social progress and cultural change. Just look at their expressions, will you? Of the two, Pompeo is clearly the most uncomfortable. He seems rather bombed out by the whole affair. Frankly, I don't blame him. He's probably used to shaking hands with prime ministers and presidents of powerful nations like France, UK, and China. He wouldn't have imagined in his wildest nightmares that one day he'd be shipped off halfway across the globe, cap in hand, to talk and grovel up to the Taliban, to talk peace with what is essentially a state-level militia. That is what they really are. No more than that. They're not even a state, not even a regional militia. So he and his night vision goggle wearing, synthetic armored, bulletproof helmet wearing force of 100,000 with $3 trillion worth of military equipment has just been owned by a sandal wearing, turban top donning farmers whose idea of cutting-edge military tech is Soviet-era AK-47s, dust-filled RPGs, and improvised roadside bombs made from things like washing machine timers, pagers, and garage door openers. I don't know if you knew that. Now, I don't know how true that is exactly, but I actually read a report once, a while ago, saying how some Afghans, the Taliban, were even using those old-fashioned muskets from the 19th century, and even colonial-era sort of those British Lee Enfield rifles. Now, can you imagine, those muskets going up against, say, an M4 carbine or a M16A2 semi-automatic rifle? It just makes this whole outcome even more extraordinary. And that reminds me of an old British saying that goes something like this: it's not the size of the dog in the fight that counts, but the fight inside the dog. And that is clearly the case here. So I don't actually blame Mike Pompeo for looking like he's been caught with his pants down and he wants to be out of there like he's got the shits or something. I'm honestly trying not to be biased here, but you'll agree that Mullah Baradar looks very much like the adult here of the two. His face is just so nonchalant, nondescript, and, well, frankly, normal. Especially for an occasion as big and momentous as this, you'd expect someone like him from the rugged terrains of Kandahar to look out of place. And you've seen that place. It's just, you know, deserty, dusty, boulders and rocks, very underdeveloped. You'd expect him to look awkward, yet here he looks rather confident and surprisingly irritated. He looks irritated by it all for some reason, like he's done this many times with big shots of world politics before. And he, more than anything, he looks like he's, you know, he has something more important to be doing. Like, I don't know, getting some milk before the shops close or something. Honestly, it's just crazy. Okay, let's be fair, because we're always fair. You know that on Atlantic Muslim. America, seriously, America, you have nothing to be ashamed of, because here you are up against, let me put this to you straight, you are up against probably what is the last and the greatest continuing, remaining old school warrior culture in the world. Because the samurai have gone, the Cherokee have gone, the Vikings have gone, the Spartans have gone. There's no one else left. So you, America, lasting 20 years is no mean feat. But I honestly can't imagine that this is the end of the story. The Taliban are not just going to give up and forget what the Americans have done to them for the last 20 years. That's just ridiculous. I mean, it won't be in the next week, but you just know that one day somehow, whether it's through funding other subsidiary groups, somewhere down the line, the Taliban will have their revenge. After all, this is literally in their code. I'm not joking. It's called Ni'al al-Badal, which translates as justice and revenge. So the Pashtuns, let's just put it to you straight, never forget a slight, let alone an all-out war. That's just their culture, guys. Revenge is literally ingrained in their law. So this is not over by a long shot. I hope it is. I hope we finally get peace over there, because God knows how many people have died. That place deserves peace more than any other place, I would imagine, in the world. It's just been, I mean, the Soviets were there for 10 years. The Americans have been there for 20 years. Before that, God knows what. I think there was a civil war with the Taliban and the government forces. So that place, come on, deserves peace. And frankly, far too many people have died. Far too many people. It's unbelievable how sad and tragic that place is. So the situation, I picture the situation like this. All this time, America had the Taliban Cobra inside a sack, and they were beating it with a huge stick over and over again for 20 years. And what's about to happen now is that the Americans are about to open this bag with the snake and release it out into the open wild. Now, you tell me, what do you think is likely to happen? Is it going to come out all, sorry, master, I've been a bad boy, master, forgive me, master, I'm going to behave myself, master, or is it going to come out all angry and more dangerous than when it went in? I imagine after 20 years of brutal beating by the Americans, I seriously doubt the Taliban's, as I said, I hope they do, remains a nationalist ideology. I hope they do go down the peace route, because too much has happened over there. People deserve a break, dudes. We all thought after the USSR defeat, Vietnam, the Boer War by the British, the Boer War, and things like all that, we all thought that that there was a lesson that had been learnt by big powers. But I think this just adds to the list that it doesn't matter how big a power you are. If you're going up against a determined foe with a martial culture and a valorous history that goes all the way back thousands of years to Alexander, and a culture that is truly a warrior culture, for the Western audience, this is the modern day equivalent of the Spartan culture. And a culture who is living on mountaintop. The Pashtun culture is a mountain civilization. This is a mountain culture, and the mountain cultures are notorious for breeding, almost by definition, warriors. We see other examples of other ethnic groups who live on mountains, whom have done similarly brave military feats. So we had the Scots. So, you've all seen Braveheart. So the Scots, historically, are, obviously now they have been absorbed into the British military, but the Scots are notoriously hard people. And they've proven that in their history. And just as another example, the Chechens and the Dagestanis, and generally that Caucasus region, which is very mountainous, and people are living in a very harsh, brutal terrain. So people who live in these places, they have to be hard. They have to be hard. They have to go without food and the basic amenities and the comforts and luxury of, say, Wi-Fi and broadband for most of their day. They have, so, and historically, of course, they had to survive on limited resources. So people living on mountains, they tend to be very insular. They tend to mix very little with other groups adjacent to them. So they develop a mentality of harshness, hardness, and they're very tough, basically. So when you're up against a culture like that, it doesn't matter how strong you are, how powerful you are. It doesn't matter that you are the United States of America. It doesn't matter that you're spending $800 billion on the military, because the 20 years that have passed proves, without a doubt, conclusively, that you will be embarrassed. You will be embarrassed. And as I said, there's no shame in that for America. The Pashtuns are a uniquely exceptionally hard military group. So let us hope that this is the end of it. And let us pray for the dead. And let us pray that this is a new chapter in Afghan history, and we can finally have some peace, because if anyone, they deserve it. Anyway, I always say this, it's been a long one. It always tends to be a long one with me, I'm afraid. But if you like it, you like it. If you don't, no problem. Anyway, I hope you will subscribe. And obviously, once you subscribe, you need to click on that bell button, because otherwise you will not know that something new has been uploaded. So inshallah, you will stay well. Please click like, comment and share. And until next time, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.